Welcome to the Brain Gauge channel. I'm Mark Tomerdahl, and just want to talk about peripheral neuropathy today. We got a question, and a very good question. And the question was, does peripheral neuropathy impact brain gauge scores? So first, a very quick answer to this is that uh, it depends on how bad peripheral neuropathy is. And so why don't we talk now? The longer answer, we're going to start with what is peripheral neuropathy? And peripheral neuropathy, and basically is when you've got some nerve degeneration in the skin. And let's think about it in terms of peripheral nervous system and central nervous system. Peripheral nervous system is what provides your brain with inputs. And those inputs can come from the skin, or they can come from the eyes, or they can come from the ears. But in the case of the skin, peripheral neuropathy is when you lose sense of touch. And, there's different varying degrees of it. Just like when you have poor eyesight and you don't have perfect vision, or you have poor hearing and you don't have perfect hearing. But, you basically, so you have different degrees, just like you have different degrees of poor eyesight, you also have different degrees of peripheral neuropathy. And if it's not that bad, then you're completely okay to test. But let's go a little farther, and let's talk a little bit about how we test, or how people have been testing before. And what is traditional sensory testing is shown right here, where basically you're trying to feel or figure out what that basic skin sensitivity is, and you deliver a von Frey hair. This is basically, it's like a hair. These are plastic calibrated hairs, and they're either very, very light. They range from light hairs all the way up to really, really stiff hairs that are as stiff as a nail. And if you can feel the really light ones when they're pressed down on your skin, that bend very easily, then you've got good skin sensitivity. But if you can't feel anything, even with the stiffest of those von Frey hairs, then that means you've got pretty bad peripheral neuropathy. And obviously there's a range, and you can feel it. And the main disadvantage of that system is simply that somebody has to administer it. It's calibrated. It takes a little while to do it, but it does take somebody to sit there and do it. Now, what does it mean to actually? Let's talk a little bit about the differences per peripheral nervous system and central nervous system. As I mentioned, the PNS, or peripheral nervous system, provides inputs, and so when you give a stimulus with that input, you basically are just pressing into the skin. And what's going on in the brain, cortical activity is kind of chattering all the time. This is looking at what's coming out of an electrode. If you stick an electrode in the brain, the right place, and then you try to stimulate that place, you just see a little bit of chatter. But it goes up a little bit when you do press on the skin. But then it goes back to chattering, and you can call that noise. But the noise is actually a really important part of brain activity. Your brain is not quiet. All the neurons are always active. And if you don't have noise, that means you're brain dead, or you don't have, there's nothing alive. But anyway, perception takes place when you have a larger, your signal noise ratio is a little bit larger. And so this is really sort of at the heart of what's wrong with just doing very low, small stimuli, is because it's barely above the level of the noise. So, one of the basic tenets of good engineering and engineering design is looking at or maximizing what we call signal to noise ratio. So what you want to do is maximize a signal. If you're going to develop a test, for example, you want to maximize a signal that you get here that's over this noise. And obviously, when you're looking at thresholds, or we're looking at skin sensitivity, you're really not. You're just seeing what's the minimum input you can get that overrides that noise. Okay, this all does have to do with peripheral neuropathy, I promise. So we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so some metrics do change with age, and we published this a long time ago, and we just showed that let's just look at the static threshold measure right here. And we won't talk about dynamic threshold in this video, but static threshold does go up with age. And it ranges between 5 and 15 microns. That's a huge range. And so right off the bat, that's very linked to what's going on in the periphery. It's very linked to skin physiology. And how do we, and so what's the best way to test? So keep in mind, remember those numbers 5 up to 15. So what does the brain gauge do? The brain gauge actually delivers stimuli in the 200 micron range. And basically, the way you read these charts is that this is for amplitude discrimination. Now, when you look at it on your results, you get a bar chart that says, bigger numbers are better. But this is raw data, and this is what's used to determine, this basically is what's used to determine those numbers on the bar chart. And you see that these numbers stay pretty much the same, even though you have variation from 5 to 15 microns in terms of skin sensitivity in these groups. We now have no change in amplitude discrimination. And that's because the signal to noise ratio of that test is so high. So we're delivering test stimuli of 200 microns or greater. And, even and the difference between skin sensitivity of 5 to 15 microns doesn't have very much of an impact on those tests. So that's really what we're looking at. We're looking at cortical metrics that involve the brain and interactions between those stimuli. And as long as the signal is strong enough to get in there, then we are doing okay. Now, past performances that we've seen, 30 microns do people with skin sensitivity twice as bad as people in this old age group still test pretty well. So in short, the answer is dependent on how bad peripheral neuropathy is. And again, you can think of this just like eyesight. Eyesight's really, really bad. If they're completely blind, then they can't take an eye test. But if at some level, they'll be able to take the test. So we've successfully tested like diabetics, for example, with thresholds in the range of 30 to 50 microns. Starts getting up there a little higher. You may want some adjustments to your test, and we've done that before. Especially if you're testing nothing but people in that range, we can modify the test so that they can do that. Also notice that if neuropathy is in just one hand, you can test either hand. You can switch hands and just check off your setup, change it in your setup. And we also have an amputee model. So if they don't have a hand, and you can deliver the stimuli with that model, and it works very well. You actually get the same answers. So thanks for watching, and there are other related videos, and please send me your questions. I love answering questions, and it helps everybody because a lot of people don't ask them, but then they benefit greatly from the questions that you're sending us. Have a great day.